Emma Thompson couldn't speak, not from shock, but from the fact that her lungs were already tightening, already screaming for what Linda Morrison had just stolen. Her medical bracelet caught the light. Asthma, albuterol required. Linda Morrison looked at it, looked straight at it, and turned her back anyway. If this has your blood boiling right now, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and don't you dare look away. The morning started the way most mornings do for Emma Thompson. Her alarm went off. She silenced it twice. And on the third ring, she finally dragged herself out of bed with the kind of exhausted determination that only teenagers and early morning flight travelers truly understand. Her bag was already packed, had been packed since the night before, which was unusual for Emma, who typically ran on the philosophy that anything done ahead of schedule was essentially wasted energy. But this trip was different. This trip to Los Angeles was her reward. 3 weeks of straight A's, a completed science project, and one very proud father who had promised her that if she kept her grades up, she could fly out to visit her aunt during fall break. Her father, Michael Thompson, had said goodbye at the front door of their home in Queens. He had a meeting. He always had a meeting. That was the life of a man who had spent 23 years climbing the ranks inside Delta Airlines, working his way from ground crew all the way to senior vice president of operations. Michael Thompson was not a man who took days off lightly. And on this particular morning, he had a board presentation that he absolutely could not miss. He hugged Emma at the door, held her a little longer than usual, and pressed her inhaler into her hand before she stepped into the car. "You know the rules," he said. "Keep this with you, not in your bag, on your body." Emma rolled her eyes in the way that only 17-year-olds can. The kind of eye roll that communicates simultaneously, "I hear you, Dad," and also, "Please stop treating me like I'm 12. "I know, Dad. I've had asthma since I was 4. "Which means you've been leaving your inhaler somewhere it shouldn't be since you were 4, he said, and kissed her forehead. "Call me when you land." She didn't know, as she climbed into the rideshare, that she would be calling him much sooner than that. JFK Airport on a busy morning is not a peaceful place. It is loud, crowded, and moving at the particular kind of frantic pace that makes even experienced travelers feel slightly unhinged. Emma moved through it with her earbuds in and her backpack on one shoulder, navigating the security line and the terminal, with the practiced confidence of a girl who had been flying since she was old enough to sit in a seat alone. Her father's work had its privileges. She knew airports the way other kids knew shopping malls. She found her gate, checked in, grabbed a bottle of water from a vending machine, and settled into the boarding line right on time. The flight to Los Angeles had her in a window seat. She had her headphones. She had her inhaler in her jacket pocket, exactly where her father had told her to keep it. She was, by every measurable standard, ready. The first thing Emma noticed about Linda Morrison was the way she stood. Not the uniform, not the careful makeup, not even the practiced smile she deployed like a tool at the top of the jetway. It was the posture. Linda Morrison stood at the entrance to the aircraft the way certain people stand when they believe the space around them belongs entirely to them. Back straight, chin slightly elevated, eyes moving over every passenger who passed with the particular kind of assessment that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with judgment. Emma didn't think much of it at the time. She smiled politely, moved down the aisle, found her seat, and tucked her backpack into the overhead bin. She kept her jacket on because the plane was cold, and she kept her inhaler in her jacket pocket because that was the rule. Because that was always the rule. Because her father had made her promise. The plane filled up around her, a businessman with a laptop, an older couple sharing a bag of chips, a young mother wrestling with a car seat 3 rows ahead. The ordinary chaos of a full flight settling into itself. everyone doing the small negotiations of shared space that air travel demands. Emma put her earbuds in and pulled up a playlist, watching the tarmac through her window with the mild, untroubled interest of someone who has done this many times before. She didn't notice Linda approaching her row until the shadow fell across her lap. "Excuse me." The voice was clipped, professional on the surface, but there was something underneath it, a sharpness that didn't belong there. Emma pulled out one earbud and looked up. Linda Morrison was standing in the aisle, looking at her with an expression that Emma would later struggle to describe because it wasn't quite hostility, and it wasn't quite suspicion. It was something more complicated than either. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision. "Yes," Emma said. "Can I see what you have in your jacket pocket?" Emma blinked. "My inhaler?" "Take it out, please." There was something in the way Linda said please that made it clear please was not really part of the request. Emma reached into her pocket and produced the inhaler. A standard blue albuterol rescue inhaler. The kind used by millions of people every single day. The kind that is entirely and unambiguously a medical device. Linda took it from her hand before Emma had fully extended her arm. Not asked to examine it, took it. "Hey," Emma said, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "That's my medication." "This is not an approved carry-on medical device," Linda said, turning the inhaler over in her hands with a frown that managed to look both official and entirely manufactured. "It's an inhaler for asthma. I have a medical bracelet right here." Emma held up her left wrist. The bracelet was silver, engraved clearly. Emma Thompson, asthma. Albuterol inhaler required. Linda glanced at the bracelet. The way you glance at something you've already decided doesn't matter. "I'm going to need to take this to the front and have it checked." "You can't take my inhaler," Emma said. And now there was something new in her voice. Not anger yet, but the precursor to it. The tight, focused feeling of someone who understands that something is going wrong and cannot yet determine how wrong it is going to get. "I need it. That's why it's called a rescue inhaler. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to calm down." "Ma'am?" To a 17-year-old girl, in a tone that carried the specific weight of being both condescending and dismissive at the same time. "I'm not being dramatic," Emma said carefully, very carefully, in the way that young black girls learn to be careful in situations where their reactions will be used against them, regardless of what those reactions are. "I have asthma. That inhaler is prescribed to me. You can see my bracelet. You can check my boarding pass. My name is Emma Thompson, and I need that inhaler." "I'll look into it," Linda said, and she walked away with it. The man in the seat next to Emma, a heavy-set white man in his mid-50s named Frank, who had been pretending to read a magazine, lowered the magazine and looked at her over his reading glasses. "She just took your medicine?" "She took my medicine," Emma confirmed, and she heard her own voice as if from a slight distance, as though her brain was already beginning to process what her body was starting to feel. The first faint tightening in her chest that she recognized, and that she had spent her whole life knowing could go from faint to serious in a very short amount of time. She pressed the call button. Nothing happened. Then a different flight attendant, younger, with anxious eyes, appeared at her row. "Is there something I can help you with?" "The other flight attendant took my inhaler. I need it back. I have asthma and I need it." The younger attendant's expression flickered between concern and the trapped look of someone who knew they were standing between something they understood to be wrong and an authority they were afraid to challenge. "Let me get her." Another stretch of time passed. The plane was still at the gate. The door was still open. Outside, the morning sky was gray and unhurried. Inside, Emma sat with her hands flat on her thighs and breathed slowly and deliberately, the way her pulmonologist had taught her. The way you breathe when you feel the edges of your lungs beginning to feel like they've been lined with something rough. When Linda came back, she was not carrying the inhaler. "I've reviewed the situation," Linda said with the air of someone delivering a verdict, "and I'm going to need you to either dispose of this item or deplane." Dispose of this item? The words landed in the cabin the way a stone lands in still water. The ripple was immediate. People near Emma's row had been paying attention, in the way people on airplanes always pay attention to disturbances while pretending not to. Frank lowered his magazine completely. The older couple across the aisle stopped eating their chips. 3 rows up, a woman with her phone already angled in Emma's direction shifted her grip. "I'm not disposing of my medication," Emma said. She said it quietly. She said it clearly. She said it in the voice of someone who is fighting very hard to stay calm while standing at the edge of something frightening. "And I'm not getting off this plane. I have a right to fly. I have a medical condition. You can call a supervisor. I am the lead flight attendant on this flight," Linda said. "My word on this aircraft is you are not a doctor," Emma said, "and that is prescription medication. I have reason to believe this substance may not be what you claim it is." And there it was, out in the open. The thing that had been sitting underneath the entire exchange like a foundation finally visible. Reason to believe. Not the brand name printed on the canister. Not the pharmacy label with Emma Thompson's name on it. Not the medical bracelet on her wrist that existed for exactly this kind of situation. Reason to believe, in a tone that indicated, if you were listening closely enough, that the reason had nothing to do with the medication at all. Frank cleared his throat. "I've been sitting here the whole time," he said. "That's clearly an inhaler. Sir, I'm going to ask you to let me handle this situation. I'm just saying what I can see with my own eyes." "Sir." A woman 2 rows back stood up slightly in her seat. "She's shown you her medical bracelet. Why is this still a conversation? Ma'am, please remain seated. She needs her medicine." The woman's voice was steady, but her face was not. "She's a child. She needs her medicine. This is a matter of aircraft security, and I will ask everyone to—" "Security?" A man near the back of the section said it loudly enough that his voice carried. "She's 17 with an inhaler." The cabin had shifted. It had done it quietly, the way a crowd shifts, not all at once, but in stages. One person and then another, and then another, until the collective weight of attention is no longer neutral. People were watching. People were recording. Phones had appeared with the particular discretion of people who understand they are witnessing something that needs to be documented. Emma felt her chest tighten another notch. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose, in, out, slow, controlled. She was managing it. She was still managing it. But managing it without her inhaler was a negotiation. And like all negotiations, it had a limit. "I want to call my father," she said. "You're welcome to call whoever you'd like after you've made your decision," Linda said. "You have a little time." "I want to call him now." "Emma." Linda said her name in a way that suggested she had found it on the boarding pass and was deploying it as a tool of false familiarity. "I understand you're upset, but on this aircraft, my responsibility is to every passenger. And if I have a concern about a substance, my name is on the canister," Emma said. "My name is on my bracelet. My name is on my boarding pass. I am not carrying street drugs. I am a 17-year-old girl with asthma, and you have taken my rescue inhaler while I am sitting on an airplane. And I am starting to have trouble breathing." The last 5 words were not a performance. They were a fact. Her voice had shifted very slightly in the way voices shift when the body is doing something the mind is trying not to acknowledge. The tightness in her chest had moved from the edges to the center. The air coming in felt thinner than it had a short while ago. Frank looked at her. Actually looked at her. The way you look at someone when you've stopped pretending you're not paying attention. "Hey," he said quietly, "are you okay?" "I'm gonna be okay," Emma said, and she said it with the particular precision of someone who was also giving herself a directive. "I just need my inhaler." Linda looked at her. Something passed across her face that might have been the beginning of uncertainty, might have been the first flickering of the recognition that this situation had traveled somewhere she hadn't intended it to go. But if that recognition was there, it didn't reach her voice. She repeated the time limit and turned and walked back toward the front of the plane. The cabin erupted in whispers, not the polite, suppressed whispers of people being discreet. The urgent edge of something whispers of people who understood they were watching something unfold in real time and were trying to figure out what, if anything, they could do about it. "This is insane," the woman 2 rows back said to no one in particular. Frank turned to Emma. "Do you need me to get up? Flag someone? I can go up there." "I'm okay," Emma said. "I'm going to call my dad." She reached for her phone. Her hands were steady. That was the thing about Emma Thompson that people would talk about later, in the days and weeks when this story had spread far beyond the walls of the gate. Her hands were steady. Her voice was controlled. Even with her lungs beginning to betray her, even with a flight attendant holding her medication a short distance away, even with a plane full of strangers watching her, she was steady. She found her father's contact. She pressed call. It rang. Michael Thompson picked up. His voice carried the focused distraction of a man in the middle of something important. "Emma, you okay? You should be boarding right now." "Dad." She said it quietly because she needed to conserve air, and because she needed to not alarm him before she'd gotten through the necessary information. "I'm on the plane. I'm at my seat. But I need you to listen to me." Something in her voice reached him immediately. She heard the shift, the way the background noise of his meeting moved farther away, the way his attention narrowed to a point. "Talk to me," he said. "The flight attendant took my inhaler," Emma said. "She said she thought it was street drugs. I showed her my bracelet. I showed her the label. She won't give it back, and now she's saying I have to throw it away or get off the plane. And Dad, I'm having trouble breathing." The silence on the other end of the phone had weight to it. "What's her name?" Michael Thompson said. Not a question. A request for information delivered in the voice of a man who has moved in the space of a breath from one mode of operation to an entirely different one. She said her name is Linda. Linda Morrison. She's the lead flight attendant. "What flight?" "The one to Los Angeles. We're still at the gate." Another silence. Shorter this time. Emma could hear him moving. She could hear a door. She could hear the particular acoustic change of a man stepping out of a room. "Emma, I need you to do something for me. I need you to stay on the phone. Do not hang up. Do you understand?" "Yes." "And I need you to keep breathing slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. You know how. I know how." "Good." She heard him typing something. Rapid, purposeful keystrokes. "I'm pulling up the flight right now. You're still at the gate?" "I think so." "Okay." More typing. "Emma." "Yeah." "I need you to put the phone down for just a second and press your call button." She pressed it. "Okay," she said. "Good. Keep it pressed if you can. I want someone coming to you." His voice was calm. Absolutely, completely calm. The kind of calm that isn't the absence of feeling, but the presence of absolute focus. And Emma, Dad, I need you to pass the phone to that flight attendant when she comes back. Emma didn't ask why. She already knew in the way that children know things about their parents that they've never been explicitly told. That something was about to happen. That the balance of this situation, which had been tilting in one direction for the past stretch of time, was about to tilt somewhere else entirely. She held the phone against her chest and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Slow. Controlled. The tightness in her chest was real, and it was getting more real. And she was managing it. But managing it was work, and the work was harder without what she needed. Across the aisle, the older woman had put down her chips entirely. She was watching Emma with an expression that was equal parts worry and fury, two emotions that had been braiding together in the cabin, pulling tighter with every passing second. The younger flight attendant appeared at Emma's row first, her anxious eyes now openly worried. "Are you—" She said, "You're breathing." "I need Linda," Emma said. The lead attendant. "I need her now. My dad is on the phone and he needs to speak with her." "I'll get her," the younger woman said, already moving. Frank put his hand briefly on the armrest between them, not touching her, just near her, the way people gesture solidarity when they don't know what else to do. "You're doing great," he said. Emma nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything that wasn't strictly necessary. A short time later, Linda Morrison reappeared, her expression carrying a fresh layer of authority. The expression of someone who had used the time in the front of the plane to shore up her certainty and was returning prepared to deliver finality. "I've made my decision," Linda said. "I'm going to need you to—" "My dad," Emma said, and held up the phone. "He needs to talk to you." Linda looked at the phone, then at Emma. The expression on her face in that fraction of a second was one that Emma would remember for the rest of her life. It was the expression of someone who has never once considered that the girl they've been dismissing might have something to say that changes everything. "This is not the time for, please," Emma said. And she said it not because she was begging, but because she was buying time. Because the air in her lungs was running out of patience. And she needed Linda to take the phone before Emma's body made the decision. For both of them. Linda took the phone. She pressed it to her ear. "This is Linda Morrison, lead flight attendant." "Who is this?" And Michael Thompson, senior vice president of operations at Delta Airlines. The man who had spent 23 years learning every regulation, every policy, and every procedure this airline had ever written, said, in a voice like the first quiet moment before a storm breaks over open water, "This is Michael Thompson, and you are holding my daughter's medication." The silence that followed those words was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a cabin full of people who had stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Linda Morrison stood in the aisle with a cell phone pressed against her ear, and the color in her face shifted in real time. The way water changes when you drop something dark into it, spreading from the center outward until there was nothing left of what it had been before. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had lost its official edge entirely. The way a knife loses its edge when you run it across the wrong surface. "Who did you say this was?" "Michael Thompson," the voice on the phone said again, and it was not louder than the first time. It did not need to be. "Senior Vice President of Operations, Delta Airlines, badge number 7741, and you are Linda Morrison, lead flight attendant, employee IDF 2294. Currently holding my daughter's prescribed rescue inhaler while she sits in her seat with an active asthma condition. Am I correct?" Linda's mouth opened. then closed. "Am I correct, Miss Morrison?" "I was following protocol," she said. And even she seemed to hear how hollow it sounded because her free hand came up and touched the lapel of her uniform jacket in a gesture that had nothing to do with the uniform and everything to do with the sudden, overwhelming need to hold on to something solid. "You were following protocol," Michael repeated. Not a question, a repetition. The kind of repetition that a person uses when they want the other person to hear themselves. "Can you tell me which protocol requires a lead flight attendant to confiscate a minor's prescription medication that is clearly labeled, clearly identified by a medical bracelet, and clearly necessary for that minor's immediate health and safety?" In her seat, Emma Thompson was counting her breaths, not casually, deliberately, the way her pulmonologist had taught her to do when the tightening started. And the inhaler wasn't immediately available. In for 4 counts, hold for 2, out for 6. It was a technique. It worked, but it worked the way a bucket works when the ceiling is leaking. It managed the situation without solving it, and the ceiling was still leaking. Frank, the man in the seat beside her, had fully abandoned any pretense of reading his magazine. He was watching her with the focused attention of someone who had made a quiet, personal decision to do something if things got worse, even though he wasn't entirely sure what that something would be. "You're still good?" he asked, low enough that it was just for her. "Still good," Emma said, and her voice was controlled but thin, like a wire under tension. "Your dad sounds like he knows what he's doing." "My dad," Emma said. And for just a moment, something that might have been relief, or might have been pride, moved across her face. "Always knows what he's doing." In the aisle, Linda's posture had changed completely. The authority she'd walked back with, that carefully constructed professional certainty, was gone. She was standing slightly sideways now, her shoulder turned toward the front of the plane, as though she was trying to have a private conversation in a room with no walls. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I understand your concern, but I want to assure you that the safety of all passengers—" "The safety of all passengers," Michael said, and his voice had that specific quality now, the quality of complete and absolute stillness, "includes my daughter, who is 17 years old, who has a documented medical condition, whose inhaler, Ms. Morrison, is a Class B medical device that is explicitly protected under Federal Aviation Administration. Regulation 14 CFR Part 382, which prohibits air carriers from refusing to transport passengers with disabilities and from confiscating assistive devices and medical equipment. Are you familiar with that regulation?" Another silence, shorter than the first one, more devastating. "I will need to consult with the captain," Linda said. "You will give my daughter her inhaler," Michael said, "right now. And then you will take the phone to your captain. And then you will step away from my daughter and you will not approach her again. Those are my instructions. Do you understand them?" Linda looked at Emma. It was a different kind of look than the one she had been deploying. It was the look of someone who had run a calculation and arrived at an answer they didn't like. She reached into the front pocket of her uniform jacket and produced the inhaler. She held it out. Emma took it. The moment Emma's fingers closed around that canister, something moved through her that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It wasn't just relief, though relief was in it. It was something harder, something with more weight to it. The particular feeling of having been in a situation where your body and your rights and your basic dignity were all at stake at the same time, and having held it together through the whole thing, and now having something back that should never have been taken. She put the inhaler to her lips and pressed down. The medication moved into her lungs, and the tightening began to release, slowly, the way ice releases when the temperature shifts, not all at once, but unmistakably. A loosening, a return. She exhaled. Frank let out a breath he'd been holding for a while. "Good," he said. Just that one word. But he said it like it was the most important word in the English language. Across the aisle, the older woman who'd been watching pressed her hand to her chest. "Thank God," she said. To no one and to everyone. But the phone was still in Linda's hand, and Michael Thompson was not done. Linda Morrison walked to the front of the aircraft with a cell phone and a posture that had completely rearranged itself. The young flight attendant who had been hovering near the galley, the one with the anxious eyes, watched her come and stepped out of the way without being asked. Because there are certain moments when even people who don't fully understand what's happening understand enough to move. Linda knocked twice on the cockpit door. It opened. Captain Robert Ellis was a man who had spent a significant portion of his professional life being responsible for hundreds of people at cruising altitude. It was a calm face, a face that had learned to be calm because calm was the only viable option in his line of work. He looked at Linda. He looked at the phone. "I have a passenger's father on the line," Linda said. "He's requesting to speak with you. He's identified himself as Michael Thompson, SVP of Operations." The expression on Captain Ellis's face did not change dramatically, but something in his eyes did. "Michael Thompson?" "Yes, sir." He took the phone. Back in her seat, Emma was breathing easier, but thinking harder. The inhaler had done its job, and her lungs had stopped their rebellion. But her mind was running fast, processing everything that had happened, reconstructing it, examining it, sitting with the full weight of what it actually was. A woman had taken her medication because she thought it looked like drugs. A woman in a uniform, with authority, had looked at a medical bracelet and a prescription label and a 17-year-old girl who had told her, clearly and calmly, what she needed, and had decided that none of it was enough, that she wasn't enough. "How are you feeling?" Frank asked. "Better," Emma said. "Physically." He heard the word she'd chosen. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Behind them, the cabin was buzzing. Not loudly, the specific low-register buzz of a plane full of people all processing something simultaneously, like a hive that has sensed something without yet being able to name it. Phones that had been angled toward Emma's row during the confrontation were now being used for text, the sharp, rapid kind that people send when they've witnessed something they can't wait to tell someone about. A woman named Natalie, seated a couple rows back, had been recording since the moment Linda had first approached Emma's row. She had footage of the entire confrontation. She didn't know yet what she was going to do with it. She suspected she would know soon. In the cockpit, Captain Ellis had been on the phone with Michael Thompson for a stretch of time. His face had gone through a series of quiet adjustments during that time, each one more significant than the last. When he ended the call, he handed the phone back to Linda without looking at her. "Get me the gate agent," he said, "and get me the station manager right now." "Captain, if I could just explain—" He said her name the way you say a name when the name itself is the end of the conversation. "Get me the gate agent and the station manager, now." The door of the plane reopened. The passengers who were paying attention, which was most of them, noticed immediately. When a plane's door reopens after boarding is complete, it means something has changed. It means the departure that everyone has been adjusting themselves toward is no longer the immediate future. The collective mood of the cabin, which had already been something other than relaxed, shifted again. "Why are they reopening the door?" someone asked. "Something's happening," someone else said. "Is this about the girl with the inhaler?" A third voice said, not quietly. Emma heard all of it. She kept her eyes forward and her breathing measured, and she did not look toward the front of the plane because she already knew what was coming, not in its specifics, but in its direction. And she needed to stay inside herself for just a little longer. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. It said, "Stay in your seat. I'm coming." She stared at those 3 words for a moment. Then she typed back, "Dad, you have a meeting." His response came quickly. "I had a meeting." The gate agent, a young man who had been doing this job for a short time and had never experienced anything remotely like this morning, came aboard with the kind of walk that people have when they've been given instructions they don't fully understand, but know better than to question. He went straight to the front. He and Linda had a conversation near the galley that no one could hear, but that everyone could feel. In the way you feel a storm moving before it arrives. The passenger in the row behind, a retired schoolteacher named Eleanor, leaned over to the woman next to her and said, "That flight attendant is in serious trouble." "Good," said the woman next to her immediately and without hesitation. Frank turned to Emma again. "Your dad is coming here?" "To the gate." "Sounds like it. And he's a vice president of the whole airline?" "Senior vice president," Emma said, and something in her voice was complicated, because it was one thing to know your father is powerful, and another thing entirely to watch that power arrive in real time on your behalf. "How long have you had asthma?" Frank asked. And the question was gentle, the kind of question that isn't really about asthma. "Since I was 4, Emma said. "I've had exactly 1 serious attack. My dad was there. He drove so fast to the hospital that he got 3 tickets on the way, and he never even told my mom." She paused. "He told me, though, later. I think he wanted me to know he'd always show up." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sounds like you've got a really good dad." Emma looked down at her phone, at those 3 words still on her screen. "I'm coming." "Yeah," she said. "I do." The announcement came over the intercom in the measured, neutral voice that airlines use for everything from weather delays to emergencies, as though the same tone can cover the entire range of human experience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we do apologize for the inconvenience. We are experiencing a brief delay and will provide an update as soon as possible. Please remain in your seats." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Groans, sighs, the shuffling of people who had connecting flights and were already doing math in their heads. Questions fired from multiple directions. What kind of delay? How long? Is something wrong with the plane? The younger flight attendant moved through the cabin with the particular walk of someone who is trying to look like they know what's happening without actually knowing what's happening, answering questions with the practiced vagueness of airline customer service. "We apologize for the inconvenience and will update you shortly." "That's not an answer," a man said. "I understand your frustration, sir." In her seat, Emma's phone rang. Not her father this time. Her aunt in Los Angeles, already tracking the flight, already confused about why it wasn't showing movement. "Baby, your flight isn't showing departure yet. Everything okay?" "It's a long story," Emma said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay. I'm better now." "Better now? What does that mean?" "Emma Renee Thompson, what happened?" Emma almost smiled. The full name. Her aunt only used the full name when she was scared and trying to sound stern at the same time. "I'll explain when I land." "If I land today, what?" "I'm fine, Auntie, I promise. I'll call you back." She hung up. Across the aisle, Eleanor, the retired schoolteacher, was on her own phone, talking in a low, rapid voice that carried enough for Emma to catch fragments. Took the girl's inhaler. Right there. On the plane. In front of everyone. No, she's fine now, thank God. But it was, I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. Natalie had been watching her phone since the confrontation ended. She had posted nothing yet. She was waiting, the way you wait when you sense you're at a moment that isn't finished yet. When you know that whatever you're holding is part of a larger story that hasn't reached its turn yet, she would not have to wait much longer. Through the open cabin door came the sound of footsteps on the jetway. Not hurried footsteps, not running, but purposeful. The kind of stride that belongs to someone who knows exactly where they're going and what they're going to do when they get there. And then Michael Thompson stepped through the door of the plane. He was tall, not dramatically tall, but tall enough that he occupied the entrance of the aircraft in a way that was immediately felt throughout the cabin, even by people who hadn't been watching the door. He was wearing a suit that said "Meeting," a dark jacket, a pressed shirt. The kind of outfit a man puts on when he has things to prove in a conference room. And he had left that conference room mid-presentation and driven to this airport in a car that probably broke several traffic laws. He didn't look like a man who had just done any of that. He looked like a man who was completely, utterly in control of himself, because control was the only currency he was carrying right now, and he intended to spend every bit of it. His eyes found Emma first. They always found Emma first. She had turned in her seat when she heard the footsteps. When she saw him, something in her face cracked open just slightly, not dramatically, not with tears, but with the very particular expression of someone who has been holding everything together for a very long time and has just been told they're allowed to put some of it down. "Hi, Daddy," she said. Michael Thompson walked to her row. He crouched down so he was at her eye level, right there in the aisle. This powerful man in his suit crouched in an airplane aisle talking to his daughter. "How are your lungs?" he asked. "Better," she said. "I used my inhaler." "You still have it?" She held it up. He exhaled. Just once. Just enough. Then he straightened up and turned around, and the expression on his face was something the cabin had not seen yet. Not in all the drama. Because this was not anger exactly, though anger was in it. It was something more refined than anger. It was the expression of a man who has arrived at a situation where every tool he has ever spent his career building is about to be put to use, and he knows it, and he is ready. Linda Morrison was standing a short distance away near the front of the economy section, with the gate agent on one side and the younger flight attendant on the other. And she was not crouching. She was standing straight, still maintaining some posture of authority that the situation had long since stopped by warranting. Michael looked at her. He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing. That would remain the thing the passengers talked about for weeks afterward. The fact that Michael Thompson did not raise his voice once. "Ms. Morrison," he said, "I'd like you to explain to me in your own words what occurred on this aircraft this morning." Linda's jaw tightened. "I was performing my duties as lead flight attendant, and I had a concern about—" "You confiscated a prescribed medical device from a minor," Michael said. "You ignored her medical identification bracelet. You ignored the prescription label on the canister. You ignored her verbal explanation and her request for assistance. You then gave her an ultimatum to either destroy her medication or leave the aircraft. And during the time her inhaler was in your possession, her respiratory condition was worsening." He paused, one beat. "Is there any part of that summary that is inaccurate?" The cabin was completely silent. Linda's mouth moved, then stopped. "Is there any part of that summary that is inaccurate, Ms. Morrison?" "I was trying to maintain the safety of this flight," she said, and her voice had the sound of something that knows it's already lost, but is still trying to find a foothold. "You endangered a passenger," Michael said. "My daughter, who you can see right here in this seat, wearing a medical bracelet, holding a prescription inhaler. breathing because she was finally able to use the medication you took from her. He turned briefly toward the captain's position, then back. Captain Ellis has been made aware of the situation. The station manager has been made aware. And as of this moment, I am formally initiating an incident report under FAA Regulation 14 CFR Part 382, Delta Policy on Passenger Medical Accommodations, and Delta's Internal Non-Discrimination Policy, all three of which were violated this morning. Someone in the cabin began to clap. Just one person at first, then two. Then a sound like rain beginning, spreading from the middle outward until the entire economy section was applauding. Not wildly, not like a performance, but with the specific, decisive weight of people who have witnessed something wrong and are watching it be named correctly for the first time. Linda Morrison stood inside that sound, and she did not move. Her face had gone still. Not calm, still. The way things go still when they've used up everything they had. The young flight attendant with the anxious eyes looked at her hands. Frank exhaled again and shook his head slowly. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth and then took it away and let herself look directly at what was happening without trying to soften it. Natalie had already pressed record again, and Michael Thompson turned back to his daughter. And his voice changed completely, dropped down into something softer and entirely private, even though the cabin could still hear it. "I've got you," he said. Emma nodded. Her eyes were bright, but she wasn't crying. She had been done crying since the moment she pressed that call button and her father answered. "I know," she said. What nobody in that cabin knew yet, what Linda Morrison certainly didn't know, was that footage of the entire confrontation existed on a phone a few rows back. That outside the windows of this grounded aircraft, the world was moving at its normal speed, unaware that a story that had begun as one woman's cruelty toward one girl was already in the process of becoming something much larger than either of them. Something that would outlast this flight and this morning and this particular moment of reckoning by years. What they did know, all of them, was that something had happened on the flight. Something real. Something that mattered. Something that the silence of this cabin, the applause, and the expression on Linda Morrison's face all confirmed in their different ways, was not over, not by a long shot. The applause faded the way applause always does, not all at once, but in stages, person by person, until the cabin returned to something that resembled quiet, but wasn't really quiet at all. It was the charged, pressurized silence of a room full of people who are still processing what they've just witnessed, still deciding what it means, still waiting for whatever comes next. What came next was Linda Morrison walking to the front of the aircraft. She didn't run. She didn't storm. She walked with the specific deliberateness of someone who is performing composure, because composure is the last thing they have left. And she disappeared behind the partition that separated the galley from the main cabin. And for a moment, the plane breathed. Michael Thompson stayed in the aisle beside Emma's row. He hadn't sat down. He hadn't asked for a seat. He was standing in the way that people stand when they are not finished, when the thing they came to do has reached one stage, but not its conclusion. He had his phone out and he was typing, fast and precise. The way he typed when the thing he was typing mattered. "Dad," Emma said, "you really left your meeting." "I left my meeting," he confirmed without looking up from his phone. "The board presentation. The board will reschedule." He glanced at her then, just briefly, and something passed across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Emma, you could not breathe." She didn't have an answer for that. She looked down at the inhaler still in her hand and turned it over once, the way you handle something after it's been taken and returned, checking it, reassuring yourself it's real, Frank, who had been quiet since the applause, said, "So what happens now? To her, I mean." The flight attendant. Michael looked at him, not unkindly. "That's being determined right now." "She should lose her job," Eleanor said from across the aisle, with the absolute moral certainty of a retired schoolteacher who has spent decades calling things exactly what they are. "Eleanor," the woman next to her said quietly, "I'm sorry, but she should." She took medicine from a child who was sitting right there telling her what she needed. And she looked at that bracelet. Eleanor stopped. She pressed her lips together. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly thicker. "I taught school for decades. I had students with asthma. I kept inhalers in my desk drawer because some of those kids forgot theirs. You do not take a child's medicine. You do not." Nobody argued with her. Nobody in the cabin argued with Eleanor about anything in that moment. Michael Thompson had stepped slightly back toward the galley partition. His phone pressed to his ear now, his voice low and unhurried. The passengers nearest to him could catch fragments, words like incident report and station manager and federal documentation, words that carried the particular weight of systems being set in motion, of consequences being locked into place. In the galley, Linda Morrison was on her own phone. The younger flight attendant, whose name was Megan and who had been on this job for a short time and had spent most of the morning oscillating between knowing something was wrong and being too afraid to say so, stood near the far wall and watched Linda with the expression of someone witnessing a controlled demolition and feeling guilty for not having triggered the alarm sooner. "I was following procedure," Linda said into her phone. Her voice was lower than it had been. The official quality was gone completely now. What was left was something more human and more frightened. "I had a concern about an unidentified substance. I was within my rights to—" She stopped, listened. Her free hand came up and covered her eyes briefly. "I understand. I understand that. But if you look at my record, years of service, not a single complaint, not one." She stopped again, longer this time. Yes, I'll be here." She ended the call and stood very still for a moment. Megan was watching her. "Linda," Megan said carefully. "Don't," Linda said. I said, don't, Megan." But Megan had spent the morning watching a teenager struggle to breathe and doing nothing. And the guilt of that was sitting on her chest like something physical, and she was done doing nothing. "She was 17, Megan said. She showed you her bracelet." Linda's jaw tightened. "I watched you look at it," Megan said. "I was standing right there. You looked at it and you walked away. I had a concern." "About what?" Megan's voice wasn't loud, but it was completely steady. "What exactly were you concerned about? Because I've been going over it in my head since the moment you took it from her. And the only thing that was different about that girl from every other passenger who's ever boarded a flight with an inhaler is—" She stopped herself. The word she didn't say hung in the galley between them, clear and enormous. Linda turned and looked out the small window above the beverage cart. Her reflection looked back at her, and whatever she saw there, she looked away from quickly. The station manager arrived on the aircraft. His name was Richard Hayes. He was a man who had the particular walk of someone who has been called to clean up something. He would very much have preferred not to be cleaning up. He went straight to Captain Ellis. Their conversation lasted a short time. It was conducted entirely out of earshot of the passengers, but the body language was visible to anyone watching, and many people were watching, and the body language said everything. When Hayes came out of the cockpit, he looked at the galley partition. He looked at Michael Thompson, who was still in the aisle. The two men held eye contact for a moment. "Mr. Thompson," Hayes said. "Richard," Michael said. They knew each other. Of course they knew each other. Michael Thompson knew every station manager at every major Delta hub on the eastern seaboard. That was his job. That had been his job for a decade. The network of this airline ran through him the way blood runs through a body. And right now, every part of that network was awake and paying attention. "I want to express how deeply sorry," Hayes began. "I need 3 things," Michael said, and his voice was not unkind, but it was not interested in expressions of sorrow. "I need a written incident report filed with my office before this flight departs. I need documentation of every regulation that was violated. And I need confirmation that Ms. Morrison has been removed from this flight." He paused. "Can you confirm all 3? Hayes looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "All 3. Emma heard all of this. She was sitting in her seat with her hands folded in her lap, and she was listening. And she was feeling something that she hadn't expected to feel. Something that wasn't satisfaction exactly, and wasn't relief exactly. It was something more complicated. Something about power, about how power worked, and who it worked for. And what happens when someone who had been dismissed and endangered turned out to have something that made the people who dismissed her suddenly very interested in doing the right thing. It was a feeling she didn't have a name for yet. She suspected she'd spend a long time looking for it. "You doing okay over there?" Frank asked. "I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" She was quiet for a moment. "About what would have happened if my dad wasn't who he is." Frank didn't answer immediately. He took that in the way a serious person takes a serious thing, sitting with it, not rushing past it. "That's a real question," he said finally. "I know," Emma said. "That's why I'm thinking about it." Linda Morrison came out of the galley. She was not wearing her uniform jacket. She was carrying it folded over her arm. And that detail, more than anything else that had happened, reached the cabin in a different way. A uniform jacket folded over an arm means something specific. It means the wearing of it is over. She walked down the aisle, not toward the cockpit, toward the door. The cabin went very still. She did not look at Emma as she passed her row. She looked straight ahead at the door at the end of the jetway, at the exit from the situation she had built step by step, decision by decision. She almost made it. She was a few rows past Emma when Eleanor said, loud and clear and without apology, "I hope you think about this for the rest of your life." Linda stopped, just for a second. Her back was to the cabin, to all of them, and they could not see her face. Then she kept walking and stepped off the aircraft and was gone. The reaction in the cabin was not applause this time. It was something quieter and more complicated. A few murmurs. Someone exhaling. The rustling of people settling back into themselves after being held at attention for a long time. Emma watched the door. Her father came to her row, and this time he sat down in the empty aisle seat that the gate had flagged as unsold. And he sat the way he sat when he came home late from work and came to check on her. Not hovering, not performing fatherhood, just present. The specific presence of a person who loves you and is not going anywhere. "She's gone?" Emma asked. "She's gone," he said. "What happens to her?" Michael looked at his daughter. He considered the question the way he considered most serious questions, directly and without softening it. "That goes through HR and the regulatory process. But, Emma, what she did this morning, The documentation alone puts her in serious violation of federal accommodation law. Her record with Delta is being reviewed. I don't want to tell you anything I'm not certain of, but I will tell you this. What happened to you this morning has been heard by the captain, by the station manager, by my office. It is not going to be filed somewhere and forgotten. Emma nodded slowly. And the other passengers? All these people? Their flights? The delay is being processed. They'll be compensated for the hold. We'll get this flight in the air as soon as Captain Ellis is ready. Dad? Emma looked at him. You know none of this would have mattered if you weren't you, right? If I had called Mom, or called a friend, or if you'd been in a meeting where you couldn't pick up. But I picked up. But what if you hadn't? She wasn't challenging him. She wasn't angry. She was asking the real question, the one that had been sitting in her chest alongside the tightness from the asthma. Just as real and just as difficult. What happens to the girl who calls and nobody picks up? What happens to her? Michael Thompson was quiet for a long time, long enough that Frank, who was pretending to look at his phone, was clearly listening. Long enough that Eleanor, across the aisle, had stopped pretending not to hear. That, Michael said finally, is the right question. I know, Emma said. I've been sitting here thinking about her the whole time. The girl who doesn't have you. What happens to her on this plane? The weight of that landed in the cabin the way the truth sometimes lands. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the specific gravity of something that has always been true and is now simply unavoidable. Natalie made a decision. She had been making it gradually, in stages, the way most important decisions are actually made, not in one clean moment, but in a series of smaller ones. She opened her phone. She opened her social media. She uploaded the footage from the moment Linda first approached Emma's row to the moment Michael Thompson said, "I've got you." And she typed a caption that took her a few drafts to get right. The caption read, "This happened this morning on the flight from JFK. A flight attendant took a 17-year-old's asthma inhaler. Called it street drugs. The girl's medical bracelet was right there. This is what happened next." She posted it. What had been known to only a small number of people on the plane quickly became known to thousands. Before long, there was no counting them. In the cabin, in that specific moment, there were just the people who had been there, the ones who had watched, the ones who had done something, and the ones who had done nothing, and the ones who were still figuring out which category they fell into, and whether they were okay with the answer. Megan, the younger flight attendant, came through the cabin with water and packaged snacks. The airline's small and insufficient gesture toward the inconvenience of a delay. When she reached Emma's row, she stopped. She looked at Emma, and then she looked at Michael, and then she looked back at Emma. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have said something sooner. I knew something was wrong, and I was scared, and I'm sorry." Emma looked at her, at the genuine distress in her face, at the fact that she had come to say this when she didn't have to, when nobody had asked her to, when the easier thing by far would have been to move through the cabin, handing out pretzels and saying nothing. "Thank you for saying that," Emma said. Megan nodded. She moved on, but her shoulders were slightly different after she did, slightly less rigid. The posture of someone who has put something dignified down. Michael Thompson's phone rang. He looked at the screen, stood up from the seat. "I need to take this," he said to Emma, and stepped toward the back of the aircraft. Emma watched him go. Then she looked at Frank, who had been the first person to speak up, who had said, "I've been sitting here the whole time," with the simple certainty of someone who knew what they'd seen. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," Frank said. "When you said something, When you told her that was clearly an inhaler, were you scared? Frank thought about this. A little, he admitted. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. She was in a uniform, she had authority, and I didn't know how it was going to go. He paused. But you were sitting right there, not being able to breathe. What was I going to do? Keep reading my magazine? A lot of people do, Emma said. A lot of people shouldn't, Frank said. Eleanor spoke up from across the aisle. I want you to know something, young lady. I've been on a lot of airplanes in my years. I have seen a lot of things. I have never, not once, seen a child handle herself the way you handled yourself this morning. You were calm, you were clear, you were respectful, even when you had no reason to be. Even when that woman was treating you like you were nothing. Her voice had that thickness in it again, the specific thickness of emotion that old grief and fresh anger produce when they mix. You were something. You were something the whole time. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that. Emma looked at her. At this woman she didn't know, had never met, would probably never see again, who had been watching from across the aisle and had been angry on her behalf since the beginning. Thank you, Emma said. And she meant it in layers. The way you mean things when simple words are carrying more weight than they can technically hold. Michael came back from the rear of the aircraft. His face was composed, but there was something new in it. Something that Emma recognized because she had seen it before, on the rare occasions when her father received information that changed the size of a situation he was already managing. What? She said. The video is online, he said. What video? Someone on the flight recorded the incident. He sat back down. It's already spreading fast. The number landed differently than it would have a short while ago. A short while ago, this had been one plane, one morning, one girl, one woman in a uniform making a decision that could have been catastrophic. Now it was something else. Now it was evidence. Now it was a document. Now it was something that existed in the world beyond the gate and could not be untaken. Emma said slowly, People. It's moving fast. Who recorded it? We don't know yet. Emma looked out the window. The tarmac, the other planes, the ordinary machinery of an airport going about its business while inside this particular aircraft. Something had shifted that morning that neither the tarmac nor the other planes nor the ordinary machinery would be able to ignore for much longer. Dad, she said, people are going to talk about me. Yes, he said. They are. They're going to say things about me. About what happened. Some of it's not going to be kind. Some of it. He agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a baggage cart moved past without hurry. Is it okay that I'm not scared of that? She said. Because I feel like I should be scared of that. But I'm not. I want people to know what happened. I want people to see it. Not because of Linda and not to get her in trouble, but because... She stopped. Tried again. Because if it happened to me, it happened to someone else. It's happening to someone else right now. And they don't have you coming through that door. Michael Thompson looked at his daughter for a long moment. The length of that look said more than any words he could have assembled, and he was a man who was very good with words. I know, he said, and I had my bracelet and my prescription label and a first-class education on how to advocate for myself, and I still almost didn't make it to my inhaler in time, Emma said. What does that mean? What does that mean for everyone who doesn't have all of that? She wasn't spiraling. She wasn't catastrophizing. She was thinking out loud the way serious people think out loud, moving through a problem methodically, pulling on the thread to see how far it went. And the thread was going very far. Captain Ellis's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Delta Airlines, I want to sincerely apologize for the delay this morning and for the incident that occurred on this flight. We are working to resolve the matter, and I want to assure all passengers that your comfort and safety are our top priority. We expect to be underway within the next short while. If there is anything our crew can do to assist you in the meantime, please don't hesitate to ask." He paused. Then he said something that was not in any script, not in any protocol, not in any training manual Delta Airlines had ever produced. And to the young woman in her seat, "I want to personally apologize. What happened to you this morning was wrong. It should not have happened. And I'm glad you're okay." The cabin absorbed that for a moment. Then Eleanor started clapping again, and this time it caught faster than before, and it was louder than before, and it lasted longer than before. Emma sat in her seat and looked at her hands and breathed deeply and easily, the way breathing felt when it was no longer something you had to fight for. Her phone screen lit up. A notification from a social media app she hadn't opened, then another, then more in rapid succession. The device vibrating in her palm with the insistence of something that has woken up and doesn't know how to stop. She looked at the screen. The numbers were climbing. The world was watching. It had taken the footage and a caption written in a few drafts. It had taken a woman on this plane deciding that what she'd seen was too important to keep inside these walls. And outside those walls, on phones and laptops and tablets, in offices and kitchens and commuter trains, people were pressing play for the first time and watching Linda Morrison reach across a 17-year-old girl and take what wasn't hers to take. Watching Emma Thompson hold up her wrist with its silver bracelet and say clearly and calmly, "That is my medication." Watching a cabin full of strangers slowly, imperfectly, inadequately begin to do something. And somewhere in the offices of Delta Airlines corporate headquarters, phones were beginning to ring in a way they would not stop ringing for a very long time. The number kept climbing while the plane was still sitting at the gate and Emma Thompson was still sitting in her seat, watching her phone light up like something on fire. She had stopped counting at some point. The notifications had become a sound rather than individual events. A continuous vibration against her palm that had detached itself from meaning and become something more like weather, something you couldn't control, could only experience, could only try to stand inside without being knocked over. Michael Thompson was on another call. He had moved to the back of the aircraft again, his voice low and constant. And Emma could tell from the rhythm of it, even without the words, that he was no longer managing one situation. He was managing several. The way a man manages when a single stone has hit the water, and the ripples have traveled further and faster than anyone anticipated. Frank, who had nowhere else to be, and nothing more pressing than a business meeting in Los Angeles that he'd already texted to say he'd be late for, looked at Emma's phone screen and let out a long, slow breath. "The internet is something else." "It is," she said. And then, after a pause, "I don't know how I feel about it." Frank looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." She stopped, tried to find the right words, which was difficult because the feeling was real, but its edges were still forming. "I didn't ask to be filmed. I didn't know someone was recording. And I'm glad people know what happened. I am. But that video has me on it struggling to breathe, looking scared. And strangers have watched that now, and I had no say in any of it." Frank was quiet. He absorbed that the way he'd been absorbing things all morning, without rushing past it. "That's a complicated feeling," he said. "Yeah," Emma agreed. "It is. Does it change what you told your dad about wanting people to know?" She thought about it honestly. "No." She said, "It doesn't change that. I still want people to know. I wish I'd been the one to decide how they found out." She put her phone face down on her lap. The vibrating continued. She let it. Natalie was no longer just a passenger on a delayed flight. She was a person with a phone that had not stopped pinging since she'd posted the video. Her own small device suddenly connected to something much larger than herself. News alerts were appearing on her screen. Local stations first, then national ones. The way these things cascade, each outlet amplifying the one before it, until the original event is buried under the weight of its own coverage. She stared at a notification from a major cable news network and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was uncertainty. She had posted the video because it was right, because she had been sitting there, watching something wrong happen to someone who didn't deserve it, and doing nothing had felt like participation. But now there was a cable news alert on her phone, and the views were climbing. And she was starting to understand that the thing she had released into the world was not entirely hers anymore. That it had its own momentum now. That it was going where it was gonna go regardless of what she wanted. She looked toward Emma's row at the back of the girl's head, at the girl who had not known any of this was coming. She made a decision. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She walked to Emma's row. Emma heard footsteps stop beside her and looked up to find a woman she didn't recognize. "I need to tell you something," the woman said. "My name is Natalie. I'm the one who posted the video." The cabin around them went immediately and completely still. Not the whole cabin, but the people within earshot who had been paying attention, which was most of them. Because people in tight spaces who have been through something together pay very close attention to everything. Emma looked at her, at the genuine discomfort in her face, the way she was holding herself. The phone slightly out in front of her like an offering or a surrender. "Okay," Emma said carefully. "I wanted to ask you." Natalie said, and her voice was not casual about it. It was deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who is doing something they realize they should have done before. "If you're okay with it, with the video, with it being out there. Because I posted it because I thought it was important and I thought people needed to see it. But it's your life and it's your face, and I should have..." She stopped. "I should have asked you first. I know that. I didn't, and I'm sorry." The silence that followed that apology was different from the other silences that had occurred in the cabin that morning. It was softer, less charged. It was the silence of people recognizing something human in front of them. Emma looked at Natalie for a long moment. She thought about what she had just been telling Frank. The complicated feeling. The wish she'd had some say. She thought about the woman who had gotten up and spoken when Linda was standing in the aisle. She thought about Eleanor and the decades spent keeping inhalers in desk drawers. She thought about Frank, who had lowered his magazine and said, "I've been sitting here the whole time." "Thank you for asking," Emma said. "Even now." She paused. "And yes, I'm okay with it." Natalie exhaled. It was a significant exhale, the release of something she'd been holding. It went very fast. "It's going to keep going," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "I think so. Yes." "Good," Emma said, and she meant it. The complicated feeling was still there, still real. But underneath it, deeper and more certain, was what she had said to her father. "The girl who doesn't have you." If this video was moving through the world at the speed she could feel it moving, then maybe that girl, the hypothetical one who called and nobody picked up, was a little harder to ignore. Maybe the next flight attendant on the next flight would think twice. Maybe not. But maybe that maybe was worth something. Michael Thompson came back from the rear of the aircraft, and he was moving differently than he had been. Not faster. More contained. The way a person moves when they have received information that has significantly raised the stakes of a situation they were already taking very seriously. He sat down beside Emma. "Delta Corporate has been watching the video," he said. Emma looked at him. "What did they say?" she asked. "They want to issue a public statement. They want to address what happened, and they want—" Michael paused here in the way he paused when he was being careful. "They want to request a meeting with you, with us, to discuss the incident and the company's response." "A meeting with me," Emma said. "I'm 17. You're the person this happened to. When?" "They're proposing as soon as we're available." Emma looked out the window. A plane was taxiing away from a neighboring gate, moving toward the runway with the slow, purposeful patience of something that knows exactly where it's going. She watched it until it was out of sight. "What do you think I should do?" she asked her father. And Michael Thompson, who had spent 23 years making decisions in rooms full of powerful people, said the most honest thing he knew how to say. "I think that's entirely up to you. This is your story. What happened this morning happened to you. The company needs to answer for it, and they will whether you're in that room or not. But if you want to be there, I will be right next to you. And if you don't, that is also a complete and valid choice." Emma sat with that for a moment. "I'll be there," she said. The video kept climbing. The number arrived on Natalie's phone, and she looked at it, and then looked at Emma, and then looked at the number again because it had the quality of something that didn't feel entirely real. A figure that belonged in a press release rather than on the screen of a person sitting a few rows back on a delayed flight. The news cycle had fully caught the story by now. Not the polite edges of it, the local stations and the social media shares, but the center of it, the major outlets, the ones that employed anchors who read things into cameras and reached living rooms across the country. Somewhere, in a television studio in Midtown Manhattan, a producer was cutting together a package. Somewhere in Washington, a spokesperson for the Department of Transportation was being asked to comment on applicable federal regulations. Somewhere online, the name Linda Morrison had been typed many times and not once with kindness. In an apartment in Queens, Emma's mother, Rachel Thompson, had seen the video. She had been getting ready for work, coffee in hand, phone propped against the kitchen cabinet, and she had seen her daughter's face on her screen, and the coffee had gone cold on the counter because she could not put it down to move. Could not do anything except stand in her kitchen and watch the worst half hour of her life that she hadn't even been present for. She called Michael. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said before she could say anything. "Michael?" Her voice did not sound like her voice. "She's okay. She used her inhaler. She's sitting right next to me. She's okay. Put her on." He handed the phone to Emma. "Mom." "Baby." One word, and the weight in it was everything. The specific weight that only a mother's voice carries when the thing she feared happened while she wasn't there. "I watched the video. I know. I'm okay. She took your inhaler. She took your—" Rachel stopped. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had raised 2 children in New York, buried her mother, gotten through a cancer scare with her chin up and her voice steady. But the sound she made then was the sound of all of that being temporarily set aside, of the part of her that was just a mother watching her child. "Emma, I could not breathe watching that video." "I know," Emma said. A sound came from the phone that was half a sob and half a laugh, and Emma felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight in a different way than the asthma, the tight way of holding it together, of being the steady one, of keeping her voice controlled while adults made decisions around her. "I'm okay, Mom," she said again. And this time she let herself say it the way she actually meant it, not as a performance of calm, but as a simple, true statement. "I really am. I'm coming to get you," Rachel said. "The flight is about to. I am coming to get you." Michael gently took the phone back. "Rachel, she's on the flight. She's going to Teresa's. She's safe. I'm going to stay until the plane takes off." His voice was the specific voice of a man who has been married long enough to know which battles to choose. And this was not one of them. "I promise you, she is safe." A pause on the line. Then, "Tell her I love her." "She knows," Michael said. "But I'll tell her again." Captain Ellis's voice came over the intercom again with the announcement that the crew was preparing for departure and requesting all passengers to return to their seats, ensure carry-on items were properly stowed, and prepare for a revised departure. The cabin stirred back into its pre-flight configuration. Seatbelts clicked. Phones went into pockets. The low-grade anxious energy of a delayed flight, settling finally into the relief of movement. Michael Thompson stood up from the aisle seat. He took his jacket and his phone, and he looked at his daughter. In the way he had been looking at her since she was 4 years old and her lungs first decided to make everything harder than it needed to be, like she was simultaneously the most capable person he knew and the thing he was most afraid of losing. "You have to go," Emma said. "Dad, you have to go. They're not going to hold the plane." "Let them try," he said. And there was something in that. Not arrogance, but a very specific quality of a man who has spent the morning being tested and found that he still has more in reserve. Then, "I'm kidding, I'm going." He didn't immediately move. "Dad, I know." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced something. A card. Not a business card. A plain white card on which he had written a phone number in his own handwriting. "This is my direct cell, not my assistant, not the office line. My cell. You have it in your phone, but I want you to have it on paper too. If anything happens between now and landing, and anything at all, you call that number." Emma took the card. She looked at his handwriting. Her father's handwriting was the handwriting of someone who had written millions of words in a professional life and had never sacrificed legibility for speed. Every letter clear, every number distinct. "I know your number, Dad. Now you have it on paper too," he said. And she understood then that this card was not really about the phone number. It was about the giving of it. The act of placing something physical in her hand that said, "I am reachable. I am findable. No matter what." She put the card in her jacket pocket, in the same pocket where the inhaler was, both of them together. "Go," she said, "before I change my mind and make you stay." He hugged her. Not the quick doorstep hug from earlier, a real one. The kind where neither person counts the seconds. "I love you," he said into the top of her head. "Call me when you land." "I will," she said. And then he let go and stepped back and walked up the aisle and stopped once, briefly, to exchange a look with Frank that contained more than either of them said. And then he was through the door and onto the jetway and gone. The door of the plane closed. The cabin made its final settling sounds, the small adjustments of people committing to a journey. Emma sat with her hands in her lap and her inhaler in her pocket, and her father's handwriting on a card pressed against it, and she breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Not because she had to, because she wanted to, because breathing freely when a short while ago it had cost her everything she had, just to maintain it was something worth paying attention to. Frank settled back into his seat. "So," he said, "Los Angeles." "Los Angeles," she confirmed. "What are you planning to do there? Before all this, I mean." "What was the trip for?" "See my aunt. Sleep. Eat her cooking. Watch bad movies." She paused. "Normal stuff." "You still planning on normal stuff?" She thought about the meeting, the CEO's office, her father's voice saying, "This is your story." The video spreading. "Some normal stuff," she said. "Yeah." The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines found their voice. The aircraft began to move, and the passengers who had spent the better part of the morning inside, something that none of them had anticipated when they'd set their alarms and packed their bags and driven to JFK that morning, settled into the rhythm of a flight finally beginning. Emma watched the gate pull away through her window. She watched the terminal recede. She watched New York fall away below her as the plane lifted, the grid of streets and rooftops becoming abstract, becoming pattern, becoming something you could hold in your eye all at once rather than navigate through. Her phone had service for a little longer. The notifications were still coming. She turned the phone over. She thought about Linda Morrison, not with satisfaction, which surprised her, not with anger, which surprised her more. She thought about her with something closer to sadness, the specific sadness of someone who cannot fully account for how another person arrives at a particular decision. What had Linda seen when she looked at Emma? What had she told herself in the moment she decided that a medical bracelet and a prescription label and a girl's own words were not enough to establish the truth of the situation? What had she thought was going to happen? Did she think it was going to be fine? Did she not think at all? Emma didn't have answers. She suspected she never would. Eleanor caught her eye across the aisle. The older woman was settled into her seat with a cup of coffee and the expression of someone who has done what they came to do and is now simply going home. She smiled at Emma, not the wide, performative smile of a stranger, the small, real smile of someone who has been through something with you and knows it. Emma smiled back. Natalie looked at her phone one last time before the flight attendant asked everyone to enter airplane mode. The video had climbed far. Comments were running in a river she could no longer read individually. Too fast. Too many. The collective voice of hundreds of thousands of people who had watched what happened and had something to say about it. She put her phone away. She thought about the caption she had written, the drafts, the decision to post. She thought about Emma's face when she'd walked up and said, "I'm the one who filmed it, and I should have asked." She thought about the word Emma had used, good, said simply and without performance, the word of someone who had thought about it and meant it. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She didn't know what the meeting with the CEO would produce, or what the regulatory process would conclude, or what Linda Morrison's life would look like on the other side of this. She didn't know if any of the things this story set in motion would be enough. Enough for what? She wasn't even sure. Enough for the next girl? Enough for the situation that wouldn't go viral? Enough for all the moments that never get recorded and never reach the CEO's office? The moments that stay exactly what they are. One person's word against another. One bracelet that gets looked at and dismissed. One inhaler that stays confiscated because nobody picked up. She didn't know. But the story was out. It was moving. And some things, once they start moving, don't stop until they've gone as far as they need to go. While the plane crossed over the country and Emma Thompson slept for the first time that morning, her head tipped slightly toward the window and her inhaler in her pocket, and her father's handwriting on a card pressed against her ribs. The video kept climbing, and at Delta Airlines headquarters in a conference room, people in expensive suits were sitting around a table with a video playing on a screen at the far end of the room, and not one of them was looking at the screen. They were looking at each other, because everyone in that room already knew every second of the footage by heart, and what they were trying to figure out now had nothing to do with what had happened, and everything to do with what came next. One of them slid a folder across the table. Inside was a preliminary report on Linda Morrison's employment record. Years of service, no formal complaints. A record that would have read as exemplary a day ago, and read as a collection of unanswered questions now, in the specific light of a morning that had made certain things impossible to look away from. "The Thompson meeting is confirmed," someone said. "Good," said the woman at the head of the table, the one whose title was Chief Executive Officer, and whose name had been attached to press releases. She had short gray hair, and the direct, unblinking gaze of someone who has made difficult decisions her entire career, and has learned that the only thing worse than a difficult decision is a delayed one. "What's our position going into it?" someone asked. "Our position," she said, "is that we were wrong. That what happened to that girl was wrong. And that we are going to say so clearly, specifically, and without the kind of corporate language that sounds like accountability, while actually being the opposite of it." She paused. "And then we are going to talk about what we are going to do. I know the regulatory exposure. I knew it before any of you sent me a memo about it this morning." She looked around the table. "This is not about exposure. A 17-year-old girl almost had an asthma attack on one of our planes because one of our employees decided that her word and her bracelet and her prescription label were not sufficient. That is the fact we are starting from. Everything else follows from that fact." The room was quiet. "What's the latest?" she asked. Someone checked their phone. The number was climbing. "What are we projecting?" A pause. "At current velocity, it's moving fast." She nodded once. "Then we have a short window to demonstrate that we understand the difference between responding to a story and actually doing something." She closed the folder in front of her. "Those are not the same thing. I want everyone in this room to understand that before we walk into the meeting." She stood up. The meeting was over. On the plane, Emma slept. Outside the windows, America moved below her in its enormous, indifferent, complicated way. Fields and highways and cities and the long stretches of land between them where nobody was watching a video or writing a headline or sitting in a conference room deciding what accountability looked like. Just land. Just distance. Just the ordinary fact of a country going about its business while inside a single aircraft. The story of a girl and an inhaler and a morning that refused to stay small continued its journey toward whatever it was going to become. Her phone was face down on the tray table. The notifications were still arriving, all of them carrying some version of what had happened in her seat, all of them deciding for themselves what it meant, what it demanded of them, what they would do if they were Frank, if they were Natalie, if they were Eleanor, if they were the girl with the bracelet and the inhaler, and the father who picked up. And somewhere, in an apartment in Queens, Rachel Thompson was sitting at her kitchen table with her cold coffee and her phone, watching the views climb, watching the comments pour in, watching strangers defend her daughter with a ferocity that should have felt strange and instead felt like the only thing that made sense. And she was crying, in the way you cry when something terrible happened, and the terrible thing is over, but the knowing of it will never be. And in a house in Los Angeles, Emma's Aunt Teresa was making food that nobody had asked her to make. because that was what Teresa did when she was scared. She cooked. She filled her kitchen with the smell of something warm and ready, something that said, "You are coming here. And when you arrive, there will be something good waiting." Because sometimes that is the only thing you can do. Make something ready for when the people you love come home. And Michael Thompson was in a car on the way back to a meeting that had already ended and would need to be rescheduled. And he was not thinking about the meeting. He was thinking about a 4-year-old girl in a hospital bed who had looked at him with eyes that said, "I trust you to fix this." And he had fixed it. And he had been trying to fix everything since. Every time. Every instance. Every morning like this one. But he knew the way you know things you never say out loud. That he could not always be the one who picked up. That the world needed to be different in ways that went beyond one father's reach. And that the girl sleeping on that plane, his girl, was going to be part of making it different. He knew that the way he knew his own heartbeat. The car moved through Queens. The plane moved through the sky. The story moved through the world. Emma landed in Los Angeles by the time her wheels touched the runway at LA. The video had accumulated a staggering number of views. She didn't know that number when she walked off the plane. She found out when her Aunt Teresa met her at the baggage claim, grabbed her by both shoulders, looked at her face for a long moment to confirm she was real and breathing and intact, and then held up her own phone. "Baby," Teresa said, "do you have any idea what is happening out there?" Emma looked at the number on the screen. She was quiet for a moment. "It's a lot," she said. "It'll keep going," Teresa said. "It'll be even higher by the time we get to the car." It was. The drive from LAX to Teresa's house in Inglewood was slow in the specific Los Angeles variety of traffic that existed on mornings, regardless of what the Maps application promised. Emma sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past her window. The particular light of Southern California that is different from New York in every possible way. Warmer and more direct. The kind of light that makes everything look simultaneously more relaxed and more exposed. Teresa drove and did not talk for the first stretch of the drive, which was its own kind of gift. Teresa Thompson was in her 50s and had spent her career as an emergency room nurse, which meant she understood better than almost anyone that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for a person who has been through something is drive the car and let the silence do its work. "Your mother called me several times," she said finally. "I know," Emma said. "I talked to her when we landed. She wanted to fly out. I know. I talked her out of it. Told her you were coming to me, and I had enough sense between the two of us to handle whatever needed handling. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She's calling again, and she is going to need to see your face on a video call, not just hear your voice. Deal with it." "Deal," Emma said. Another silence. Then Teresa said, without taking her eyes off the road, "I watched the video. I know. All of it. I know. That woman looked at your bracelet," Teresa said. And her voice did the thing that Rachel's voice had done. That particular shift that happens when the emotion is too specific and too real to be contained entirely in a professional register. Teresa had spent years in emergency rooms. She had seen things that would flatten most people. And the sound in her voice right now was the sound of someone for whom none of that experience had built immunity against watching someone try to take her niece's inhaler. She looked right at it. "She did," Emma said. And still. And still. They drove. The city moved. The light stayed the way Los Angeles light stays. Direct and warm and indifferent to whatever human business is being conducted underneath it. "You handled yourself beautifully," Teresa said. "I want you to know that." Not because you had to be calm. You shouldn't have had to be calm. But you were. And you were because you're extraordinary. And I need you to hear that from me directly." Emma didn't answer right away. She was looking at her hands in her lap, at the inhaler she was still holding, because she had not stopped holding it since her father handed it back to her on the plane, as though her fingers had decided on their own that this time they were keeping it. "Auntie," she said, "I keep thinking about something." "Tell me." "I keep thinking about what it took. To get my inhaler back, my dad had to leave a board presentation and drive to the airport. Someone had to record the confrontation and post it online. People had to watch it. The CEO's office had to call." She paused. "That is what it took for someone to give me back my own medication." Teresa was quiet. "And I had every advantage there is," Emma continued. "I had a bracelet. I had a label. I had the right words. I knew how to stay calm. I had a father who picked up." She turned and looked at her aunt. What does someone do if they don't have all of that? What do they do? Teresa looked at the road for a long moment. "That," she said finally, "is the question your father has been asking since before you were born." "I know," Emma said. "I'm just finally understanding why." While Teresa's kitchen filled with the smell of whatever she had been cooking, Emma sat at the kitchen table and called her father. He picked up on the first ring this time. "You landed," he said. "I landed," she confirmed. "Dad, the meeting. I've been thinking about it." "Okay. I don't want it to be about Linda." A pause on his end. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want to walk into that room and spend the whole time talking about what one flight attendant did. Because that's not the whole story. Linda Morrison is not the whole story. She's the part that got filmed. She's the part that went viral." Emma had her free hand flat on Teresa's kitchen table, the same gesture she used on the plane when she was working through something. "The whole story is bigger than her. The whole story is about what happens when systems don't protect people who don't have what I have. That's what I want to talk about in that room." She heard her father breathe. 17 years old, he said quietly. And she could hear in those 3 words that he was not surprised by what she was saying. He was moved by it, which was different. "I'm serious, Dad. I know you are." A pause. "And you're right. You're completely right. And yes, we will talk about exactly that. And I want to know what they're actually going to do," she said. Not a statement, not an apology that uses many words where 2 would do. What are they actually going to change? "Then that's what we'll ask," Michael said. "Good," Emma said. And she hung up and sat in Teresa's kitchen and ate the food that had been cooking. And for the first time since the alarm had gone off that morning, she let herself stop solving the problem for a few minutes and just ate. The video crossed millions of views. The first news crew appeared outside Teresa's house. Not a full crew. 1 person with a camera and 1 person with a microphone and the specific posture of journalists who are trying to look casual while being clearly intentional. Teresa looked out the front window and turned to Emma with an expression that said, "I have years of emergency room experience, and I have never once had a news crew outside my house." "Don't go out," Emma said. "I wasn't planning to," Teresa said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Emma said. "My dad said this might happen." "What do we do?" "Nothing yet. He's handling the communication until the meeting." Teresa looked at the crew outside and then back at Emma. "You want more food?" "Yes," Emma said immediately. "Good," Teresa said and went back to the kitchen. Because some responses to extraordinary situations are more useful than others, and feeding your niece was the most useful thing Teresa Thompson knew how to do. The press outside had doubled. Someone had identified the address, which was the part of viral stories that nobody who goes viral in a good-faith, unprepared way is ever fully ready for. The way the world narrows around you, the way the radius of your privacy contracts without your consent. Inside, Emma was on the couch with her phone doing something that required a specific kind of courage that was different from the courage of sitting in her seat and breathing carefully while someone held her medication hostage. She was reading the comments, not all of them. There were too many for all of them, but she was reading enough of them to understand the shape of the conversation that millions of people were having about her. Most of it was exactly what Natalie had hoped when she'd pressed post. People who were angry on Emma's behalf, people who had their own stories, their own moments of being dismissed in uniforms and offices and waiting rooms, their own times when the bracelet and the label and the clear plain words were not enough. Comments that said, "This happened to my mother," and comments that said, "This happened to me on a different airline," and comments that said, "I am a nurse and I can confirm that is a standard albuterol inhaler, and what that flight attendant did was dangerous," and comments that said, "I cried watching this." But there were other comments too. They were always there, the ones that looked at the same footage and saw a different story, ones that Emma read with the specific, controlled attention of someone who has decided to understand the thing they're looking at, rather than be destroyed by it. She read them carefully. She did not respond to any of them. She put her phone down and looked at the ceiling. "Auntie," she called. "Yeah, baby. People are awful." "Some of them," Teresa called back. "What percentage would you say?" Emma thought about it. "Maybe 15? Then 85% of millions of people are decent," Teresa said. "Those are not bad odds for the internet." Emma considered this. It was actually a reasonable way to look at it. She picked her phone back up. Something happened that nobody had anticipated. It came in the form of a post on a public social media account from a woman named Evelyn Carter, who was in her 60s, retired, and had spent years as a flight attendant for a different airline before her retirement. Her post was not a comment on the video. It was its own thing. It was paragraphs long, and it had been written carefully. And it said things that took the conversation somewhere it hadn't been yet. Evelyn wrote that she had watched the video, that she had spent years in a uniform, and she knew every regulation that applied to medical devices on aircraft, because she had been trained in them and retrained in them. She wrote that what Linda Morrison had done was not a misunderstanding of policy. It was a violation of it. Clear, unambiguous, documented. She wrote that in her years, she had confiscated exactly 0 prescription inhalers because inhalers were not contraband, had never been contraband, and that anyone who had been properly trained knew that. And then she wrote the thing that made her post travel faster than the video itself. She wrote that she had witnessed in her career a pattern, not one person making one mistake, a pattern of certain passengers being asked to justify things that other passengers were never asked to justify, of certain medical devices being scrutinized in ways that identical medical devices belonging to other passengers were not. She did not use the word discrimination because she said she was not qualified to make legal determinations. She used instead the word pattern, and she used it several times. And she said that what had happened to Emma Thompson was not an anomaly. It was a data point. Her post reached hundreds of thousands of shares quickly. Emma read it twice. Then she texted it to her father with no message attached. He replied quickly, "I've seen it." She texted back, "She's going to be at the meeting, isn't she?" He replied, "I'm working on it." Emma's mother Rachel's face appeared on a video call on Emma's phone, and the expression on Rachel's face was the expression of every mother who has ever watched something terrible happen to their child from a distance and had to trust that other people were taking care of what she should have been there to take care of herself. "Let me see you," Rachel said immediately. Emma held the phone out at arm's length. "Your face," Rachel said. "My face is fine, Mom. You look tired. I was on a plane early and I almost had an asthma attack." Tired is accurate. "Emma," Rachel's voice shifted. The mother voice. The one that does not perform emotion, but simply has it right there on the surface. "I want to say something to you, okay? I watched that video and I watched you hold yourself together in a way that I don't know if I could have done. And I need you to understand that that composure, that steadiness, it is yours. It is a gift. But you are also allowed to not be composed. You are allowed to be furious. You are allowed to fall apart. You don't have to perform anything for anyone. Not for the cameras, not for the CEO meeting, not for me." She paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Emma looked at her mother's face on the screen, at the specific texture of her mother's worry, which was different from her father's worry. The way all things between her parents were different. Her father's moving immediately to action. Her mother's moving first to the person, to the interior of the thing, to how are you really, not just how are you walking and breathing and managing. "I understand," Emma said. "Are you falling apart at all?" Rachel asked privately. "It's okay if you are." Emma thought about it honestly. "A little," she said quietly. "When Auntie's not looking." Rachel nodded. "Good," she said. "That's healthy. That's the right response to what happened to you." "I'm okay, Mom. I know you are. I know." Rachel's eyes were bright. "You are so much like your father. It terrifies me sometimes. He also says I'm okay while being quietly something else entirely. Auntie said the same thing. Your aunt is a very wise woman." Rachel wiped her eye quickly, the gesture of someone who has decided this is not the time for tears and is making that decision by force. "Call me after the meeting, the second you walk out of that room." "I will," Emma said. The call ended. Emma sat with her phone in her hands for a moment in the particular quiet that follows a conversation with someone who knows you completely and loves you anyway. The quiet that is its own kind of restoration. Then she put the phone down and went back to the kitchen table because Teresa had put more food on it. And the food was warm, and the kitchen was the one room in the house where the cameras outside didn't matter. The meeting at Delta corporate headquarters was scheduled. Michael Thompson was there when Emma and Teresa arrived. He was standing outside the elevator bank on the executive floor in a suit that carried the same quality. The quality of a man who treats every room he enters as a room he intends to handle. He hugged Emma first. Then he looked at her face the same way Rachel had on the video call, checking for the thing that wasn't visible in the video. The interior condition. "How are your lungs?" he asked. "Perfect," she said. "How are you?" "Ready," she said. They went in. The conference room was full. The CEO, whose name was Elizabeth Harper, was already seated at the head of the table. Several other executives, 2 people from the legal team who had the specific expression of lawyers who have been told to listen and not speak unless spoken to. And at the far end of the table, someone who had not been announced in advance, who was sitting with her hands folded and her posture straight, and her face carrying the particular calm of someone who has spent her career in emergency rooms and is not easily rattled. Emma stopped when she saw her. "Auntie," she said quietly. "Elizabeth called me," Michael said. "She read Evelyn Carter's post. She wanted a medical perspective in the room." Teresa looked at Emma and gave her a small nod that said, "I know. I'll explain later." They sat down. Elizabeth Harper looked at Emma directly. Not at Michael, not at the table. At Emma. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I want to start by saying something that I mean without qualification and without the kind of corporate language that makes sincere things sound like press releases." She paused. "What happened to you on the flight was wrong. We failed you. A member of our staff made a decision that endangered your health, violated your rights, and caused you real harm. I am sorry. Delta Airlines is sorry, and we intend to demonstrate that that apology is not a statement. It is a starting point." Emma held her gaze. "What comes after the starting point?" she asked. One of the lawyers shifted slightly in his seat. Elizabeth Harper did not shift at all. "That's exactly what we want to discuss with you." What followed was a long meeting that Emma would spend a long time afterward trying to describe to people who asked. Because meetings between 17-year-olds and corporate executives are not supposed to go the way this one went. Elizabeth Harper meant what she had said about the language. She had clearly instructed the room before Emma arrived, because every time one of the executives began to move toward the kind of careful, hedged corporate speak that is designed to sound like commitment, while actually being the absence of it, Elizabeth stopped them with a look and they recalibrated. Teresa spoke about medical devices and emergency protocols, and the specific medical danger of confiscating a rescue inhaler from a person with active asthma. She spoke with the authority of years in emergency medicine, and she did not soften any of it. The room listened. Emma spoke about the girl who doesn't have a father who picks up. She'd been thinking about how to say this, and she said it the way she had thought it, clearly and without apology. She said that what happened to her on the flight was not primarily a story about a bad employee making a bad decision. It was a story about a system that did not have enough safeguards to protect passengers who couldn't escalate the way she had escalated. "What," she asked the room, "is the process for a passenger who is being denied their medication on an aircraft and has no one to call? What is the formal, accessible, available in the moment process? Because if the answer is there isn't one, that is what needs to change." The room was quiet. "There isn't a sufficient one," Elizabeth Harper said. She said it plainly. "You're right, and that is what we are changing." The twist that nobody in the room had seen coming arrived partway into the meeting when one of the executives slid a folder across the table toward Michael. Michael opened it, read the first page, and went very still in the specific way he went still when he was controlling his reaction. "What is it?" Emma asked. He looked at her. "They've commissioned a review," he said slowly, "of every passenger complaint filed with Delta over the past several years involving medical devices or disability accommodations." He paused. "There are hundreds of complaints." The number landed in the room like a stone. "Hundreds," Teresa said. "Hundreds of cases," Elizabeth Harper said. "Most of them resolved without formal action. Some of them dismissed. Some of them based on the preliminary review, patterns similar to what happened to Emma." She looked at Emma. Evelyn Carter was right. It is not one data point, and we are treating it as the systemic issue that it is. Emma looked at the number. Hundreds of other people who had been on planes with bracelets and labels and words that were not enough. Hundreds of other moments that had not been recorded, had not gone viral, had not reached a CEO's office, had not had a father who picked up. She felt something move through her that was not satisfaction, and was not vindication, and was not any of the emotions that people expect you to feel at a moment like this. It was grief, quiet and specific and real. Grief for all those other cases, for the moments that stayed moments and never became anything larger. "What happens to them?" she asked. Elizabeth looked at her. "The review will contact every complainant, offer review. In cases where Delta's policies were violated, offer remedy. Remedy? Emma repeated. What does that mean? What does that look like for someone who had an asthma attack on a plane because nobody gave them their inhaler back? It means, Elizabeth said carefully, that we find out what they need and we try to provide it. It is not enough. I know it is not enough. But it is what we can do, and we will do it. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, she said. What about going forward? This was where the meeting turned from accounting for the past to building something different from it. Delta had prepared, with the input of medical consultants and disability rights attorneys, a revised protocol for medical devices on all flights, a clear, documented, accessible process for passengers whose medical equipment was being questioned, a direct line to supervisors that bypassed the lead flight attendant, mandatory retraining for all cabin crew on FDA regulations covering medical devices and disability accommodations, and a third thing, which Michael had not known about before the folder was opened, which was a technology proposal that had apparently been drafted in the hours since the video had spread. An app developed in partnership with medical device manufacturers and disability advocacy groups. A system that allowed passengers to pre-register medical devices before flights with documentation stored in the airline system accessible to flight crew, eliminating the situation of a passenger having to prove in the moment under duress that the device in their pocket was what they said it was. We're calling it MedPass. The executive presenting it said, it's in early development, but we are committing to a full pilot program and full rollout. Emma looked at the prototype on the screen, at the simple, clean logic of it. The idea that a person should not have to fight mid-flight for the right to keep their own prescription medication. That the proof could travel ahead of them, quiet and certain, already in the system before they even boarded. Other airlines, she said. What about them? We're presenting this at the next industry consortium meeting, Elizabeth said. Our intention is for this not to be a Delta policy. Our intention is for it to become a standard. Emma sat with that for a moment. Okay, I have one more thing. Tell us, Elizabeth said. Linda Morrison, Emma said. I don't want to talk about her punishment. That's between her and HR and whoever else handles that. But I want to ask one thing. Whatever happens to her, whatever comes of this, I want there to be training, real training, not a module, not a checkbox. I want the people who teach your flight crews to be taught by people who actually understand what it means to need a medical device to stay alive. I want them to hear from patients, from doctors, from people like my aunt. She looked at Teresa. From people who have watched what happens when someone doesn't get what they need in time. The room was quiet. Done, Elizabeth Harper said. No hesitation. No qualification. Done. Emma Thompson walked out of Delta's corporate headquarters into the specific Los Angeles light that makes everything look exposed and clear. Her father was on her left. Her aunt was on her right. Camera crews were waiting on the sidewalk with the patient. Practice stillness of people who have been there a while. Michael looked at her. You don't have to say anything. I know, she said. She walked to the cameras. She stood in the light. She was 17 years old, and she was wearing the same jacket she had worn on the plane. The one with the inhaler in the pocket because she had put it on that morning without thinking, and then looked in the mirror and decided to leave it. She said that Delta had committed to policy changes, and she believed those commitments were real, and she would be watching. She said that hundreds of complaints had been filed, and most of them had not gone anywhere, and that needed to change. She said that MedPass needed to become an industry standard, not one airline's policy, and she intended to advocate for that. She said that she was 17 and she had a father who picked up, and she was aware every single day of what that meant and what it cost and what it demanded of her in return. She did not say Linda Morrison's name. She said one more thing. She said, "The next girl might not have what I have, so whatever we build it for her." Then she put her inhaler back in her pocket, and she turned around, and she went home. Months later, MedPass launched its pilot program on Delta routes. American Airlines and United both announced adoption. The FAA opened a formal review of medical device accommodation standards across all domestic carriers. The review cited in its opening paragraph an incident on the flight and a public response that had made certain things impossible to look away from. Emma Thompson turned 18 the following spring. She received on the morning of her birthday a card from Frank, who had tracked down her contact through Michael's office with a short note that said only, "You asked the right questions. Keep asking them." She put the card next to the one her father had written on the plane, the one with his number in his own handwriting, the one that said, "Reachable, findable, no matter what." She kept both of them for a long time, long after the inhaler had been refilled and refilled again, long after the cameras went away and the meeting became a memory, and the video became an artifact of a moment that had passed into something larger than itself. She kept them because some things are worth keeping. Because some mornings change the shape of everything that follows, because a girl sat in her seat and breathed carefully, and held herself together and asked the right questions, in the world, imperfectly and slowly, and not without being pushed, began to answer. That is what accountability looks like when someone refuses to let it be anything less. In the end, what stayed with us long after the cabin lights dimmed and the plane finally lifted off wasn't just the confrontation or the dramatic rescue by a powerful father. It was the quiet, heartbreaking truth Emma Thompson carried in her chest the whole time. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and real danger is who answers the phone when you call for help. That morning taught us a lesson deeper than any policy or regulation could ever touch. Never underestimate the power of being truly seen and truly heard. Emma didn't just fight for her inhaler. She fought for every person who has ever been dismissed, doubted, or ignored simply because of how they looked, how young they were, or how quietly they spoke. She showed us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits perfectly still in seat 24A, breathing carefully through fear, speaking with steady grace even while your lungs are tightening, and refusing to let the world look away. This story reminds us that real change rarely begins in boardrooms. It begins when ordinary people decide that someone else's dignity is worth defending. It begins when we refuse to stay silent, when we choose to record, to speak up, to ask the hard questions, and when we remember that the next girl on the next flight might not have a senior vice president for a father. So let Emma's steady hands and clear voice stay with you. Let them make you braver. Let them make you kinder. Let them make you the kind of person who would never turn their back on a medical bracelet, on a trembling voice, or on a child who simply needs to breathe. If this story moved you, if it made your chest tighten with both anger and hope, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in that cabin? Would you have spoken up? And most importantly, who in your life has ever answered the phone and changed everything for or by? Share your story. Let's keep this conversation alive. And if you want more stories that remind us what real courage and real humanity look like, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're in this together. Thank you for watching.